Welcome to Bladebound Saga. I'm AJ,
And I'm Daniel.
and we survived the open beta. So, Daniel, what are we going to talk about today?
So Daggerheart has ended, at least the closed beta portion or open beta portion, and we're just going to go over everything we played, how the beta went, and then even answer some questions from the community. And so I hope you guys are excited to see what we have today and what we have to talk about. But this is our Daggerheart open beta post-mortem.
Welcome to Bladebound Saga.
All right, so we survived. Survived is an interesting word because the beta was definitely great. Daggerheart as a system is still my favorite one. Right now I'm at 70 or 68 games ran. I actually did the math. Took a little
Wow.
bit, but at 68 games ran and 2 games played. So not a lot of player experience, but a lot of games as a GM. And so today's video, we have a list of questions. We'll see if we get through it. We're just going to keep this kind of a la carte style, just having a conversation between the two of us about how we thought the Daggerheart beta went. So I guess first question on the docket is, how do you think it went? How do you feel? I have my thoughts, but I'm just curious. How
Yeah,
do you think the beta overall kind of
I mean, I,
ended up?
I feel like we ended in a pretty solid spot. Um, I think they fixed a lot of things that were kind of just inherently broken. Being able to get your lower threshold above your medium threshold, or your minor over your major, I should say. Um, and I think they listened to the community. I think Danny Press did a good job taking kind of what the community's feedback was and implementing that. I haven't played a ton actually in the since the beta closed, so but I think all in all, I think it's been pretty good. I don't have a ton of complaints.
I'm kind of mixed on where the beta ended, because at least to me, it felt like it was pretty fast.
Mm.
Like it was always moving really fast. Like we got an update every month on a new rule set. So I think when was it? March, April, when we got 1.2, and then every month 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. And I felt like we were always moving. And even now at 1.5, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable saying like, "Hey, I think the beta should be closed. We did a really good job." I feel like there could have been a couple more updates.
I agree with that. I feel like they did end the beta on one really big change of taking out the minor thresholds. And so that to me is like, hey, we're going to do this really big uh, change that'll change the way the whole game's played, and then we're going to end the beta. So I don't think that I think they're obviously going to still do updates before the final release. I would assume, but that's kind of the one thing I kind of thought that was a little bit weird was that yeah, it's just like such a game changing rule change they made, and they said, all right, here you go, play with it for 6 months.
Yeah, I'm here's something that someone did bring up a little bit. It's like technically still it's not the open beta anymore, but we could still get a rule change maybe sometime in October or November. I mean, that's still possible. Because even after the beta closed, the very next day we got a new experimental rule set. And I talked to you about it a little bit on the side where at Gen Con, um, I had the pleasure of joining one of the tables with a couple people from the Pocket Dimension and another person from Swordplay Sorcery, and then 2 other people that were just lovely. But we played in a new rule set where they basically took away the action tracker.
Yeah, you did tell me about that. I don't actually fully understand how that works, but
And it was weird because I felt like I knew a lot of the rules for Daggerheart, but coming into the experimental rule set, I felt like I was relearning a lot. Essentially, some things that they did take out from the experimental rule set was the ability to go back to back. If you took an action, someone else had to take another action first before you took another action. So kind of felt weird because in my mind, especially because I'm seeing players or from the GM side, I'm seeing players do these combo moves like the rogue doing shadow step into sneak attack or damage, or the guardian using a rope swing to reach up to a dragon and pull him down, then follow up with a tag team attack with another player. And so I was used to that flow. But when I played the experimental rule set, um, something I wanted to do was I wanted to use my action to fly as a fairy because that's what I was playing, and then move in range to be able to enrapture. I think is the ability I had, where I basically was taunting someone towards
Yeah.
me. Um, and I after moving and basically casting fly, I was kind of stuck. So it was kind of weird because I was like so used to it. I don't think it was bad, but I don't think it was preferable, because I felt like I didn't know when the enemies were going to go, and I didn't really know what fear looked like, or what like there was kind of like a weird expectation where I didn't know what turns really looked like in comparison to what we knew for the past 6 months of the closed beta or open
Yeah,
beta.
I feel like that almost kind of takes it back to D&D feeling almost like everyone gets their turn and then the DM's going to take their turn. Um, and I think you're right. I think it does kind of take away from one of the positives that we talked about before. Is one of the positives was be able to do, hey, if I don't have anything to do this turn, then I don't need to do anything. Um, but like you said, the rogue being able to do their combo. I know as a ranger, I would use a towering stock to get into position and then shoot. So that would technically be two marks on the action tracker. Um, so I mean, I didn't play it. I'd be curious to see what it's like, but I can see how it could interrupt the flow, kind of like we're used to, because before this experimental rule set, it was, hey, you guys do what you want, and then the GM's going to interrupt when they're going to with the fear or spending the fear or failing a roll. Um, but that was all at the kind of at the cost of a player because if I take two actions right now, that's two more actions the DM gets or the GM gets. So
Yeah.
it I feel like the experimental rule set kind of takes away another aspect for a player of, hey, I need to figure out if it's worth to do two actions right now because like, is it worth giving the GM more moves on their turn, which is why the combo move or the tag team rule move was such a big part, and I feel like the experimental rule set kind of almost takes away from that a little bit.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to like. I kind of had a hard time figuring out when to do a tag team.
Mm.
Granted, we were also level 2, so like the stakes are a lot lower at that level. Um, but yeah, the experimental rule set felt weird, especially when you came to like enemies. So adversaries. There's like a condition that adversaries can start off called slow, where basically for the adversary it takes 2 action tokens to do a really big hit. In that system with the experimental rule set, I feel like they'd have to rework a lot of the adversaries because then slow would just not really make sense because the GM just kind of takes his turn when he wants to take his turn. Um, so I feel like the experimental rule set ends up adding more work. I don't think it's a terrible thing. I think you can definitely run the system, but given that we had stuff in the past, I think the experimental rule set makes Daggerheart feel weird instead
Yeah,
of supporting the fundamental gameplay that I remember in Daggerheart. So at least that's how I
yeah,
felt.
I could see that for sure. And especially for us, I think we have gone from 5e, which is very structured, very much you have your action, bonus action, reaction, right? That's what you get. So for Daggerheart to kind of be almost the exact opposite, it's like, hey, you can do literally whatever you want. And especially with me and you, I know we, are a little fast and loose with the rules every now and again for if it makes sense or if it's super cool, I think we kind of let things slide. But the experimental rule set, I feel like kind of, I guess, takes away from a little bit of the strategic planning and the creativity a player can have. Again, I don't know. I didn't play it. I haven't played the experimental rule set, so. But I also don't want all this to say we're against new
Oh yeah,
ideas. Like I want to keep seeing different rules or how GMs rule things or how players come up with different things, and I don't want us to get stuck in, you know, just what we have because the whole point of Daggerheart is to be creative. I feel like at least. it's such a it gets such a medium to be creative with what your character can do, and I don't want to lose that.
Okay, so I did have a question for you because obviously you have more player experience than I do.
Mm.
Um, when it comes to Daggerheart, and I guess thinking about the beta as a whole, how long I guess did it take for you to really kind of embrace jumping in as a player versus like the old system we knew, which was only 5e.
I honestly not super long, at least for me. I think I kind of already leaned that way though, of trying to, you know, some sessions I would just make it my goal to see how I can outsmart the DM. Um, and so I think Daggerheart just kind of gives that makes that easier to do that. It lets you be creative. But I can see as someone who is very much, is lives by the rules and dies by the rules, that Daggerheart can be a little bit of an adjustment because some people don't know what to do with when you say, "Hey, you can do whatever you want." Well, what does that mean?
I
It
mean,
means whatever.
even in our core group, like our home game, we had
Mhm,
one of our friends who just had a really hard time like struggling with Wizard,
mhm,
knowing the previous 5e version of Wizard. Um, I prepare this spell. If I know this, then I can come in with this utility. But then the whole grimoire system for them was
yeah,
something that they couldn't wrap their head around. It's like, oh, this book only has these spells, but if I want to learn a new spell, I can't
mhm,
because it's not part of my domain. And so I think they were really having a hard time. And I don't know, maybe it was just because they picked the wizard, and maybe they should have picked another, or maybe if they pick another class, something will click a little bit more for them. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was seeing that a couple times, not just at our home game, but also in a couple tables where they were trying to figure out how exactly does this Daggerheart thing work.
yeah. And I can especially see Wizard kind of being tough as a first, like as your first character in Daggerheart. Wizard can be tough because if you're coming from 5e, obviously you have your list of spells and you have your spell slots, and you can cast them, and this is what you can do. Daggerheart says, "Hey, here's 3 spells in this book. Do what you want with them." And it just, as a wizard player, it's like, well, I'm by the book. I could see how that could be a little bit difficult for sure. Um, but like I said, I think that once people kind of embrace creativity and asking, "Hey, can I do this, GM?" Like stretch your abilities to the max. Uh, Go until the GM will tell you, "Hey, you can't do this." You know, I think, like I said, I played a ranger in our first session or our first campaign in Daggerheart, and I mean, I used towering stock in a ton of different ways. I mean, I made bridges. I smashed people to the ceiling. I sent people flying. You know, and it's just like doing like trying to be creative and do what the situation needed. So it's almost you almost want to instead of using your abilities to dictate the situation, let the situation dictate what you can do with your abilities. Um,
Yeah.
you know, you figure out the solution. Hey, we need to get across this gap. What can I do to get across this gap? Maybe, maybe I can create a massive tree that goes across this gap, or just. I know I keep using that example. That's just the one I know, but um, yeah, it's very different than Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think one thing that I found really important from the GM side of things was really to embrace what the players do. And we talked about, I think, in our last video, where a lot of people talk about how Daggerheart is a narrative focused game. And it is. I think it very much is. I think there's a lot of rules and mechanics within the game that just support narrative play. But I think even more so, it really is one of those systems that is a collaborative focus game first. You have the tag team attacks. You have the GM when you walking into a tavern, even from that first quick start. The GM sits you. You spot these. You spot various patrons around the room, and the GM asks, "What catches your attention?" And I think that collaboration of like I am the GM, but I'm also giving you freedom to describe what you see. Um, I mean, even recently, I thought one of the cooler moments that was showcased was we finished defeating a dragon, and we ended up entering into its lair, and there were some magic artifacts that I kind of had preset, like as a lot of GMs have when it comes to loot. But behind each artifact was a painting of its original owner, And then I basically asked, like, you see this kind of crossbow looking armament of some sort, but then behind you see a painting of what looks to be the wielder of it. And then I asked the question, what does this person look like? And so at that point, it's like we're adding lore to the game, or like the players adding lore to what their character sees, because they're just standing there. And I think it just adds a little bit of intrigue. And, I take that as a GM and kind of throw it at them later. Or it just ends up being just a cool piece of flavoring lore for the future.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I want to ask you, coming from Dungeons and Dragons, DMing for, I mean, 10 plus years, I think, and then moving to Daggerheart, how is that? Because it just feels like it's way more, like you're giving up a lot more control, it seems to be. So I'm curious how that was for you as the DM.
So it's interesting. The first part is because I was already kind of getting tired of 5e's like initiative, and combat was always a slog for me, and I think that's shared amongst a lot of people. And so I was always trying to find ways for combat to just feel better. Um, and like I think that one of the first rules I got rid of in combat was trying the no, but nobody rolls for initiative. You just go from 10 plus your dexterity, and then people didn't really like that because they like the rolling for initiative, and then so it doesn't feel good even though it is faster. Another one was, okay, let's make it where each round is no longer 6 seconds. It's mechanically 6 seconds, but thematically you can have conversations with NPCs. If something happens, you can move and adjust as you need to. Take a pause. Take your time casting a spell, narrating how it looks like, what you say. But then it's still the system didn't really work for it. Everyone was still just taking their 6 second turns. But once I got into Daggerheart, and I watched the Critical Role Let's Play introducing Daggerheart, which I thought was great, and I was like, okay, I'm really intrigued by this system. Once I started seeing it in real time, like the first encounter where it was me throwing a group of bandits at the party, and like at a campfire, and they were over the edge, and the immediate response of the player saying, "Ooh, I want to have my," like you said, you wanted to have your beast companion slink off to the other side. The other ones, someone said that they wanted to stand up and then confront them, and we were able to resolve those things, even though it was a tense encounter, even though initiative probably should have been drawn because a shot was fired, or someone fired a bow at someone's feet, and in a normal sense that probably would have started combat. But we were still able to sit in that narrative until someone really made that final strike.
Mm-hmm.
And we jumped into initiative. You guys fought back and forth. There was a little bit of push and pull in the front line with one of the dwarfs, one of the dwarf guardians, and then the big Bruce or the brute type character. I say that all to say, as soon as we jumped into combat, we just as easily jumped out of combat. As soon as one of the brutes went down, one of them was like, "Oh, hold on, he just took out Big Boss," or whatever the name of the guy was, or Big Tony or whatever. And the guy goes down. The rest of the people kind of start cowering a little bit, and the bard steps forward. It's like, "You guys better run." And that never happened. I mean, it might have happened once in D&D, but I don't really ever remembering where the players were just like, "Oh, we're just going to be bloodthirsty," and we just go in. There was kind of that narrative break where someone basically was able to just take a pause. They didn't have to wait for their turn to come around. They just stepped up and told them to back off, and we made not a charisma, a presence check, and they intimidated them and they ran off. And then it happened a second time when we were doing the quick start, and the Thistlefolk came by. You guys beat the first 3 Thistlefolk, and you then had the other ones just run in fear. Like they saw that they were getting outnumbered, and there was a little bit of a conversation with the one guy who was left behind. But combat, essentially, we entered it and exited combat all in one go. And in those big like combats, I've been going for a while, but in those big combats where we fought big dragons, players can't disengage because they can jump in at any time. And I think that's what really um, captured me. And like, even though the combat is long, like we've been in hour-long combats in Daggerheart, it never felt like it was a slog because everyone still had like, oh, I have something I want to do. Oh, I have something I want to do. They're not waiting for their turn in the initiative. So that's combat. But then the other side of things just kind of goes back to back in college when we would do a lot of improv stuff. That was always a really fun like improv sketches or something that we would do often. For those who don't know, me and AJ went to the same school, and so we had a lot of those improv sketches. And so D&D, as much as I love building the lore, I also really liked it when I sat down and we entered a town or entered a city and it was the player's hometown, and I literally would look at the player and ask them, where are you guys going? This is your hometown. I would do that naturally in D&D. And so when it came to Daggerheart, where this became something that was supported and encouraged from the GM to ask players, what do they see? What do they hear? What do you know about this? Rather than asking for a role, I found that collaboration and improv and silliness and everything, and like all of it comes together to really just be this like really, explosive melting pot for me that really made me fall in love with the system. So
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It definitely feels less, I guess, cyclical than D&D. Like, it's not just like, okay, I'm counting the turns until it's my turn, and then maybe something happens and it changes everything I was going to do. If I have something big I want to do as a player, I can go first, or I can go last and wait for someone else to set something up. And I think that adds to the flow, right? Because I think once you roll initiative in D&D, it's like, okay, I've ended one scene, now I roll initiative, and now I'm in this combat scene, and then combat's over, and now I'm in the next scene, right? Like, I do three different acts, almost
and you
like a
kind of
play.
have to pick up too. Like when you go into initiative, you kind of have to tally initiative, and it takes a second to get into it. And then once combat ends in D&D, there's kind of like, okay, here's where we're at now.
Yeah.
Um,
Are we still in initiative? Are we not in initiative? Can I just move freely now?
yeah,
And
and
at Daggerheart, you can do that at all times.
I notice players, as soon as like the boss or the beast has fallen, people are jumping in to do something because they were jumping in to do something the whole time anyway. Like there's not a break. And the same way, and I think I explain this to players all the time whenever I'm doing my learn to plays, is the same way you would jump in a conversation or an exploration is the same exact thing you do in combat. And so some people, once they hear that, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's how we don't have initiative in a social encounter. So
Yeah.
why would we have initiative in combat? So I think it kind of works really well. And I think one of the key principles, and I'll definitely go over this because I have GM tips to galore. But one of the GM tips that I always say, especially from the GM side of things, is some of the questions like, what happens to the quiet player? It's like, well, the GM, I've been kind of watching everyone react, and so when I see somebody that hasn't moved, I'll like, usually what'll happen is like I'll focus on the front line group, and then if none of the backline group will interrupt, or none of the backline groups kind of speaks up, then I'll say, what's happening in the back? And then next thing I know, they're going, and the people in the back, like the two spellcasters that are kind of sitting in the back, will just go into their turn and start moving. And so it really is kind of important, even as the GM, to kind of bring those players in, because unlike D&D, once they get to a player's turn, they can go. It's very organized that way. But in Daggerheart, there's a little bit more of a responsibility for the GM to kind of bring people in. And I've seen players do it too. As a player, I've seen people like, oh, I've taken my turn, I'm good, do you want to go? And then so I've seen people do that too. So
Yeah, I was about to say, more times than not, I feel like that's kind of what happens. I think everyone kind of knows, like, hey, I know this person hasn't gone in a while. And I think there's just kind of this unspoken rule of, like, yeah, you can do your combo move, that's fine. But I haven't really ran into someone just hogging a combat, you know? Um,
okay,
at least I haven't.
yeah.
You maybe have. Yeah, but
I've seen it once or twice, and I think some people just get really excited about their turns,
yeah,
and it's not a bad thing. They were excited, they have an idea, they want to make sure that it goes through, and it might be the only open window, so it might look like they've taken 3 turns in a row, but they're setting up for something really big. And
Yeah.
so now that does bring me up to one of the community questions that when I put this poll out and asked, like, hey, do you guys have any questions about Daggerheart? We're about to do a post-mortem. One of the community questions that I kind of think we're kind of talking about, like, players and like hogging turns.
Hmm.
One of the questions, the first question that I got was, do you think that PvP is possible in Daggerheart? How would we go about how would we go about PvP in Daggerheart?
I don't see why not. I
I
mean,
don't either. The only question I have from a mechanic standpoint is when a player takes their turn, it gives an action token to
mhm.
the GM. But if a player takes a turn and they're going against another player, who does that action token go to?
Yeah, that is true. I almost wonder if you just honestly, this sounds silly, but just kind of figure out a way to decide who goes first, and on the first failed, uh, either rolled with fear or a failed missed attack or a failed action or something like that, then it switches over. So, I mean, someone can get really unlucky and just have someone that rolls really good, and they just don't get a turn and they get wiped. I don't, that statistically that shouldn't happen, right? But
Well,
I think it would be heavily favor who goes first, in my opinion.
I think if you take this, because Daggerheart, I feel like has a lot of anime moments, at least from my experience
Yeah,
playing. If you take it like an anime, where it's almost like the sides are flipping back and forth, but I don't know how it would work in multiple settings. I think in a 1v1 setting, you kind of just double down on the hope and fear, where it's just based people going back and forth. Um, but the same way a GM can spend two fear to interrupt a person's turn, a person can
yeah,
spend two hope to
to
interrupt a
interrupt.
person's turn. But I think it would also be interesting if someone rolls with fear, they give the other player a hope. And so there's this like cascading effect of going back and forth. So if someone's
Yeah,
going to raise their power level by using the hope feature, then another person raises their power level. Like you see, what would happen between like a rogue and a guardian? You see the guardian go unstoppable, then the rogue uses their hope feature and adds
hmm,
extra damage to their sneak attack dice, and so you're just waiting for this like massive clash. And I think you can do it cinematically. But it's also one of those things like, why um, in
yeah,
the system?
yeah. That's another thing. Like, are you like, is it a bloodthirsty? Like, are you killing each other? Is it a friendly combat? Like, that's those can be different things. Like you fight to the death. Are you fighting just for fun? Also, I don't know if I'd recommend this for players that don't like haven't built a rapport with each other.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, probably
just
not.
like I wouldn't want to play with someone for the first time and say, hey, let's fight to the death. Like that's, uh, as much as this is a game, there's a lot of trust that's built on tables for sure, and it would be silly to break that trust over a PvP combat, which may or may not push the narrative along. Because at the end of the day, it's not like this Daggerheart TT RPGs, all that's not to win. Like this
Yeah,
isn't a game you win. This is a game to have fun and tell a story, right? And I think that PvP kind of may take away from that. Now, like if you're doing sparring matches, that's different. Like that can be a way to build trust between your characters, and then with that between the players. Uh, but yeah, I don't. It would definitely be interesting. It'd be a whole nother rule set. I think if you're
yeah.
trying to try to
I don't
implement
think you can
PvP.
keep the standard rule set in PvP. I
No.
think you have to build a different rule set, just because of just how the action economy works.
Hmm.
It's supposed to be jump in, jump out. For every action you do, the GM gets to do an action, and there's not really a thought of for every action you do, the players get to do an action.
Hmm.
Um, So yeah, I think 1v1 I think is probably doable. I think once you get past 1v1, then there kind of becomes like fear and hope
That's
shenanigans, and
that's
you're
a
like, who
lot to
gets
keep track
what,
of
and
for
it's just
sure. Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff to do. Um, so yeah, cool. I'm looking through some of the questions here. Um, did you find that there were any rules that were like confusing or maybe even counterintuitive?
Um, Not that I can recall off the top of my head. I feel like there was a couple times where like, hey, this is, you know, can I do this multiple times or, uh, you know, such and such. Like it doesn't say take an action, so does that mean
Mm-hmm.
it costs an action? I think that's probably one of the bigger ones I saw. Was
Oh
like
yeah.
it doesn't say like, oh, this card doesn't say use your action to do this. So can I do this without using an action? And I think that's probably one of the bigger ones I saw, and that was mostly from people trying to not give action tokens to the GM.
Yeah,
Um,
and I
but I think
think
aside from that, I feel like the rules are pretty well described. But I think they were also left open on
for the
purpose
GM.
for the GM and for the player.
Yeah,
To
I think that was a big fundamental to an extent. I think a lot of the times where there were no rules or where things were kind of left open were for the GM to kind of fill in, and I think it was kind of done that intentionally. I don't think they want to bring out a what do you call this? I don't think they want a 500-page manuscript or
Mhm.
player's handbook when it launches. I think they want to keep it probably similar to the manuscript, maybe 200 pages, kind of keep it small, because at least that's how Candela was. Candela was a small book.
Mhm.
So I assume that Darrington Presses wanted to keep it a little smaller, kind of keep it a little more quaint. So, though I am interested to see what the box set ends up becoming,
Yeah.
because I'm definitely gonna shell out the whatever the highest price box is going to be for Daggerheart. So yeah, let's answer one of the I don't know how we're going to go about this. Let's answer one
Yeah,
of
that's
the
super tough.
community questions, which was rank the classes from strongest to weakest, or let's go from weakest to strongest.
Weakest to strongest.
I don't know.
See, that's so hard because I can't think of a class that I saw that it was just ineffective, right?
Yes.
Um,
Okay. If we were doing a tier list, and maybe we do a tier list later on. Maybe we do another video later that's an actual tier list.
yeah,
If we were doing a tier list, at least thinking about my mind off the bat, if we're just going from levels 1 to 10, or let me caveat this. I think each class is stronger or worse depending on what level you're at.
yeah,
I think at level 1, wizards are significantly weaker. That's just
yeah,
my opinion. But then as they level, wizards have time stop. And time stop is pretty unrivaled in comparison to a lot of the
yeah,
other stuff. So at level 10, a lot. So I would say across the board, I don't think anything's in C tier. I think everything is
yeah,
in B tier and above,
yeah,
with
yeah.
one
There's definitely
standalone
not a
for me.
yeah. There's definitely not an unusable class.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that helps a lot with domains too.
yeah,
Because
for
you're
sure.
sharing and splitting domains, I think there's always a good domain for anyone to pick, depending on the route, the flavor they want.
If I had to choose one that I just thought got less love than the rest of them, it's for me. It's a toss up between the druid and the sorcerer. Honestly, um, the druid I didn't see a lot of. I could see the druid kind of being. I think anytime I saw a druid, it was they leaned real heavy into healing,
Or
um,
wild shape.
or wild shape, and it's kind of one or the other, right?
Yeah.
Um, and sorcerer, I I'm not. I didn't. I don't like think I only saw it once or twice, and I feel like uh, the domains are just a little bit. I don't know if they mesh as well as the rest of them do.
So I'll echo that. I'll echo the fact that I don't know how I feel about Sorcerer, because Sorcerer gets weird domains for what I would imagine for Sorcerer. Like
Hmm. The Arcana and Midnight.
they get Arcana and Midnight, which those are good domains,
Hmm.
and I like the Arcana, but the Midnight makes it flavored very illusiony.
Yeah,
Which, not to say that sorcerers shouldn't be illusion casters, they're not the sorcerer I feel like I remember, if that makes sense.
yeah, and I think one of the subclasses for sorcerer was elementalist, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't see how Midnight plays into that.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
it's Midnight's very much kind of almost what you imagine the rogue to be. Like, it's very much stealthy and doing these dark and mysterious things, or which like I said, I don't disagree. Like I think a sorcerer could do that, but I feel like Midnight kind of pigeonholes what we know a sorcerer to be, and as far at least when I think of sorcerer, I think of you know all the elements being spewed out at some point in
mm-hmm.
time, right?
and
And I think Midnight kind of takes away from that almost.
it's weird because elementalist, there's only two damage types too.
Mm-hmm.
It's physical, magical. So whether you are fire elementalist or you go water, which some people were specializing, doesn't mechanically matter.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like a weird, like, oh, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be an airbender or whatever, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, cool, it's still magic damage, and so it does feel a little weird.
Yeah.
So I'll echo that. I actually will say it's the weakest class in my opinion. Even though I did say time stop is broken, I actually think it's the wizard. And the reason I say that is because of grimoires. And
Yeah.
grimoires are just weird. Not to say that like I don't like the lore makes sense. If you find a grimoire and you study that, it's only going to have set amount of spells. And so you're studying under the tutelage of whatever that wizard was. But for me, the weird thing with grimoire is the spells don't really make sense. The ones that they
Yeah.
match together.
Yeah.
And I think that takes away from the flexibility that I feel like all the other domains get. Granted, other domains only get one feature in it, but Grimoire is kind of like a hodgepodge of I know this stuff, I know this stuff, and I know this stuff, and I don't really know how these like. It's not like one grimoire is just all damage, or another grimoire is all utility. It's kind of one grimoire has a damage spell, a utility spell, or a damage spell, a utility spell, and a recovery spell. So they're all kind of all over the place, and it kind of feels weird to me. And
Mhm.
I'd go so far as to say I saw the least amount of the class I saw the least amount was wizard, because that's just that was a weird thing for people to try.
Yeah. I did play a wizard in a one shot, I believe, and I did feel that way. It was very much hard to, uh, I guess, just figure out what you want to be as a wizard. Like, you can't build just a blaster. Like, that doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
because to get a blasting spell, you also get, uh, like just like this one, the Book of Norai. You have Fireball, which everyone loves Fireball, and you have Mystic Tether, um, which restrains. Uh, and it just feels like why do I have a support class and a support spell and a damage blaster spell kind of in the same card?
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have liked to see, like, hey, here's all your blaster, here's all your damage spells, and that's this book, and this book is all support, and then this book is all defense. Um,
And
I'm sure
maybe
they
that's
thought of
the
that.
intent, but I don't know if it comes out that way,
Yeah,
or
but
like there's a feel.
yeah, I think the thing the wizard does well though is that it really is the Swiss Army knife, which I know we've used to describe the wizard before,
Yeah.
and this it makes you be the Swiss Army knife where you can do a lot, but it's uh, you know, I don't I don't think you can do this, but I'd almost like to see, hey, if a level one card has three spells on it and it has one damage, one support, and one defense, almost like, hey, here's all your level one spells, or card level spells, whatever you want to call them, and you can choose the spells you want to fill that card. Now, that kind of takes away from the whole card system that goes going back to D&D and picking your spells, but I think that's kind of almost more so what I would
Yeah.
like to see. Uh,
Yeah, I think it would make. I think that makes sense. A wizard.
yeah,
I mean, I'll still stand by. I think wizard can be really strong because of just the options that they have. But I think for me, it leaves a little bit lacking. Though
especially
now that I
early
say that, I
level.
kind of now I want to try a wizard. Now I want to see if I can make the wizard work really well, which I'm sure you can. It's
Mhm.
just in terms of how I'm feeling. I feel like the wizard's the weakest, at least the least popular.
Yeah, you kind of even go to say this. I think spell casting is weaker than melee in
Really,
Daggerheart.
I
That's
disagree.
so. I guess maybe for me, I mostly play melee characters, or sorry, I guess physical. We call it physical damage. Um, but I mean, I've made a warrior that could do, 8d8 on one swing
Okay,
with
yeah.
the use of features and different abilities and different items, stuff like that. Um, and that's it's all in one action.
So
Uh,
I think it's so I don't disagree, but I also think that's because a lot of melee characters, from my experience, they're always bumping proficiency. They're
oh,
always
you have to.
taking extra
You
proficiency
Yeah,
just so
as a
that way they
melee,
can
you
deal
have
more
to.
damage.
You have to.
But as a caster, I'm probably not bumping proficiency very often. Now, if I wanted to, I definitely could just bump up proficiency and just deal a bunch of damage with my
Mhm.
scepter, or my mace, or not my mace, my staff. Um, but I think I think we're kind of going back to it. I think it does have a lot of flexibility to be just a high utility,
Hmm.
which I think that's kind of its intent. Um, so,
I,
but yeah,
I'll say this as a spellcaster or like seeing spellcasters, I can't think of a time where someone used their staff as a weapon attack. Like
I
it did
see it
not
very
happen.
seldomly.
Yeah, it didn't happen very often. Honestly, I didn't even know that was a thing for like the first 3 months of Daggerheart. I was like, why is this having an attack roll? Can I use this? I guess it has a far range. I guess I can just zap it, with just do damage. I didn't always have to use a card or a spell on the card. Um, so maybe that was just us missing, or maybe just me missing it when I played a spellcaster. But
Yeah. Well,
um,
I think the one thing I really like about spellcasters in Daggerheart, and we'll kind of go back and
yeah,
address the actual question for maybe the ranking. Um, but I think what I like about Daggerheart is the consistency of spellcasters, because your spellcasting is set to the DC of the spell card, not the
mm,
DC of the enemy. So usually it's like I only have to roll a 12 or higher, and in Daggerheart, 12 or higher is pretty easy to come by, considering that you have 2 hope die plus your modifier. So I really like the consistency of it, and so I think spellcasters are a lot stronger um, than other systems in, like, for instance, 5e. So
yeah. All right. So we kind of talked about the weakest.
yeah,
What do we think is the
I
strongest?
think we're on the same page for this one. We might disagree on the other ones, but I think we're on
Yeah,
the same page.
I mean,
I'll
the
give a quick
cheese.
shout out
Oh yeah, go ahead.
before we answer this. Ranger and really anything bone domain was the strongest
Yeah, Bone was
until they
so good.
patched it.
Bone was
Um,
so good.
Strategic approach, not giving an action tracker to the GM was broken. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's like that it breaks the whole action economy. The action economy is I take an action, GM gets an action. I take an action, GM takes an action. Strategic approach on the bone domain, so warrior and ranger, was
Yeah,
I take an action, GM can't move, which effectively is just a stun on
yeah,
all, not just on one of the GM creatures, a stun on all the adversaries because the GM can't activate anything. Um, unless of course they have fear. But it ends up being one of those things that I think honorable mention that was broken. Now I'm
yeah.
curious. I'm pretty sure I'm going to echo the same resound. What do you think is the strongest?
I mean, I like the Guardian, man.
It's the Guardian.
It's
It's
it has to
100%
be
the
the
Guardian.
Guardian. The Guardian can be so tanky, take no damage.
Yep.
I mean, you hit with everything. Like, you have a one, you know, whatever it is, evasion. But I mean, you can get armor to 15 armor. It's like, oh, you did 30 damage. Cool, 2 armor slots. I'm not taking anything.
Yep.
Um, and then they have all the attack of the Valor domain. No, yes,
Yeah, Valor.
I said that
Valor.
right.
Valor. Yeah, you're
Valor,
right.
yeah, yeah. And then they had Splendor was the other one.
Valor and Splendor. Yep. Oh no,
No,
Valor and
no, no, Valor and
Blade.
Blade.
Valor and
Yeah, so
Blade.
sorry, that's what I meant to say. They have all the damage of the Blade domain, and then all the tankiness, and then a little bit of support of the Splendor domain, and
And that's not
just
even
Guardian.
mentioning Unstoppable,
Yeah, it's not mentioning
which is the
Unstoppable.
nutty. This is the nuts.
Yeah,
Absolutely
it's
nuts.
I mean,
Ugh.
there's a couple different things. I mean, the cheese grater turtle or the cheese grater galappa I played. I mean, I did more damage taking damage. You hit me for 1 HP, I was doing 3 HP back to an
Yep.
enemy.
Yep.
And yeah, Guardian was just, I mean, just good, really good. Um, it's kind of, I don't want to say a must-have, but combats felt harder if you did not have a Guardian in your party, 100%.
And I think the really big thing about Guardian, in terms of why it was able to do so much damage, especially with the cheese grater, was retaliation.
Yeah.
Being able to, oh, I got hurt, and now I hurt you. Oh no,
Mm.
I got hurt again, and now you're just gonna take hit points off you. It's like
Mhm.
you can't hit me as a guardian, and this was
Yeah.
always the hardest thing as a GM because I didn't want to role play it wrong. But the guardian was always in my face, but I didn't want to hit him.
Yeah.
I didn't want to hit the guardian because that just means I'm going to lose health. And so I had to actively try to see, it's like, is there a way for this creature to not want to hit the guardian? And almost rely on the players messing up to do something that draws the attention of the big bad. Because so many times the guardian was just right in my face. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And the guardian is also the one dealing the most damage. And this goes through multiple different patches of the beta. The Guardian was the thing I feared as the GM the most, and so I will definitely dub it as the most powerful subclass or
Yeah,
powerful class.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so cool. Um, in terms of ranking, I think everything else is like probably like
High B, low A's
high B.
to
Like no,
A.
I mean I'll say the Guardian stands alone in S by itself.
Yeah, I
If
think
there's a
so.
if there's a pinnacle spot, Guardian is S,
Yeah.
and then we're gonna drop um, Bard, Seraph. I think those two specifically being Hope
Mhm.
generation. Oh, this doesn't even add into the fact that the Guardian can also generate Hope for the team,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is nuts. But I think that the Bard and the Seraph probably sit in the middle because
Mhm.
anything that generates Hope makes the party stronger.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the Rangers up there too because I think a lot of people slept on Beastmaster because your familiar could take 200 damage and it loses one stress or one
yeah,
hit point.
yeah,
That's just the way it was worded. I think that's maybe something that should change. Like it should maybe have its own minor or sorry, it's major and severe. But the Ranger pet is the best tank in the game.
I will say that it does make the Ranger pet more about. It does make the Ranger pet more utility focused. So if you
Mhm.
want a really heavy damage Ranger pet, I don't think you can get it as
I
much
don't
as
think
you would
so.
like.
Yeah.
I think you can like try to max out damage and find something substantial, but I don't think it's going to be great in terms of damage. But it is amazing for the utility,
Yeah.
and even just having the extra companion with you is really good. But yeah, so I'll agree with Ranger, um, and so I mean that leaves us with
The
um,
Rogue and the Warrior. I feel pretty comfortable putting those in the probably the B tier.
I don't know, like the Rogue and the I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it's
It's
hard because
hard.
I feel like they're all really close. Like aside from the Guardian, and then maybe the Wizard and the Druid at the bottom. And I don't even know about Druid. I think maybe it's the Wizard at the bottom. I feel like the middles, they're all super
They're
close to
all
each
really
other.
good, and that's the thing that
And
makes it hard. I think to make this to do this justice, I think we have to do a class features only tier list in another
mhm,
video because I think if we add all the domains, it becomes a lot harder because so many things overlap. But maybe that's for another video.
yeah,
So no, I think I'm comfortable with that. I think if we're going by just vibes, um,
yeah,
Guardian number one, we'll drop Ranger, Bard, and what do we just say? Seraph in kind of
yeah.
A tier, and then everything else is B tier. But in all honesty, they could all probably jump up to A tier too.
Mhm,
Maybe Sorcerer and Wizard stay down
yeah.
very high B tier. Everyone has a place in Daggerheart, so it's
Yeah.
hard to say
Yeah, it
something's
makes it
bad.
very hard. I think the balance is pretty good across most of the classes.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, it's a and every class does feel different, which I really appreciate. Also, like every class has its role or the number of roles it can fill, and they're not one class that's a lot like the other. Even the sorcerer and the wizard, which can kind of feel very samey. I feel like even those feel a lot different from each other. So I do appreciate that. Um,
cool. So, let's do two more questions and then we'll kind of look to wrap it up.
mhm.
Here's one that I wanted to know, because I have a couple, but of all the games that we've played, you've played, I've played, what was your most memorable story at the table?
You know what I'm going to say.
I don't actually. I'm
You
actually curious to
don't?
see what your
It's
most
it's
memorable.
it has to be when it was my second campaign.
Hmm.
Um, and we were doing the very first session,
No,
and
I
we're
know what you're
building
talking about.
are doing our connection questions,
Hmm.
and our GM here likes to basically have us build the first mission that we all go on, and we created this enemy called the Dragonfly, or sorry, not
Gatorfly.
Dragonfly, the Gatorfly.
We'll show
It's
that picture up here in a
yeah,
second.
yeah, we'll get that picture, and I mean, I think that thing has been referenced more than anything else across all the games I've played. Either I
Uh,
bring it up or another player that I played with brings it up, and it's almost become our unofficial mascot. I feel like at this point.
yeah.
Uh, so yeah, but it was super cool because that campaign was a lot of those players' first time playing Daggerheart,
or
and
any tabletop RPG
or
for
any
that matter.
tabletop RPG, and they created a memory that is transcending that game.
Yeah,
I think that's super awesome. That's like the
yeah.
power of tabletop RPGs, honestly.
I'll
It's
tag
that.
on to that a little bit. I still remember one time we were still in the middle of the campaign, and I ran a one shot on a Saturday morning, and there was another player that ended up joining, and we were just kind of jokingly, and one of the player made a call back to the gator fly, and I was like, okay, let me find the picture, and so I start looking through because we have like it's somewhere up in the chat, and I find the picture, post it, and the immediate response from the player who had no concept of what a gator fly is, just like, oh, that sounds terrifying. He goes like, what the hell is that? So it's just like it's freaked out by the image of this gator fly that generative AI created. Um, anyways, that being said, yeah, that was a good moment. For me, it's a weird one, and I only say this one because I don't run my learn to play any other way. Um, in our very first game of Daggerheart, and this is where I knew I loved the system, was we entered into the Clover Tavern, that first tavern that you go into. You talk to Lusa, you have these questions. You were asking, where's the Whitefire Arcanist? What is she like? It's like, oh, it's like, does she like anything? Can we get her down? And I said the words Might Muffin. And then we had this plot where the Might Muffin ended up being something that, like, oh, it's like we only have 3 left, but that guy over there just ordered it. And there was this like blue stag beetle, like large fairy who was about to eat all these Might Muffins, and you guys tried to like barter with him. He wasn't taking because you guys didn't have a lot of gold, and so he basically, or somehow, some way, the box of Might Muffins was stolen, and you guys basically ran around the town of Hush, trying to play keep away from this thing. And you guys managed to do so, and it was a very it was basically combat. But we jumped into combat, or dropped an action token. You guys did a couple things. Eventually, escaped this fairy stag beetle, and made your way to the Whitefire Arcanist, where you then shared the Might Muffins with her, where she trisected her mouth and just started eating into it. I have not run that one shot any different. I mean, other than the chase, every time we go in, they always have a new person. Like one of the questions I ask now is, you spot someone that you notice that catches your attention, and that ends up being the person who orders the Might Muffins.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, at least 50% of the time, it's been a fairy. I don't know how,
really,
but it's been a fairy. So it works on brand. But then they eat these Might Muffins, Might MYTE, for those who are wondering what in the world am I talking about. But they're basically muffins that are stuffed with mites, or like live mites in it. But they eat the Might Muffin, or they try to take it. They barter. Sometimes they barter successfully. Sometimes they manage to take one. One person literally just shoved the other guy, pushed them down, and then they just ran out the tavern. It was an older like fairy. Like they just shoved an old dude. And I was like, okay, great. That's not
cool.
that's not morally correct.
Yeah. Right.
But then they ran, and every time they meet the Whitefire Arcanist, every time they give her the Might Muffin, she gets her lips salivate, and she trisects her mouth, scarfs it down, and then goes back to her normal self. But the first thing that made me just like absolutely lose it, and then where I really was like, I love this system, and this is the system I'm going to run for at least a substantial amount of my life. So yeah. Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yeah. What I guess as we're wrapping up though, what do you hope that will kind of develop with Daggerheart? We kind of talked about what we liked. We talked about, some things we maybe needed to change, but like what are some things you'd like to see that are brand new? Maybe new domains, more subclasses, like what domains would you like to see paired together? Stuff like that.
So I don't know how this will work, but there's 2 things that I think Daggerheart is missing right now, which are just basically what D&D is kind of missing. First one is we don't really have a representation of Artificer. Whether that means add a new domain, whether that means add a new class that adds new domains, I don't know. The Artificer is one of the ones that I want to see. I obviously want to see more subclasses. I think that would be cool. I think we're gonna get that
Yeah.
eventually over time. But the other thing that I want to see in terms of classes is I want to see this is Critical Role we're talking about. I want to see Blood Hunter. I want to see how they discuss it.
Hmm.
I've seen other people who've done Blood Hunter homebrew. I think it looks cool. But I'm interested to see what Matt thinks Blood Hunter looks like in this
Yeah.
system, because health is a scarce resource in this system. You
Yeah.
cannot just keep using Blood Maledict after Blood Maledict and just marking small bits of HP. Even if you mark one, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
So
That means a lot. Yeah.
those are the two classes I'm interested in terms of domains. I don't know. Maybe Blood Hunter brings in the Blood domain, and then that brings in Warlock. And then I'm not sure what that, or Artificer brings in the tech domain, or the
Yeah.
I don't know what the mech domain or something like that, and then that gets paired with something else like mech and codex or something like that. So
Yeah.
those are the two that I'm interested to see. I think with new classes, you kind of have to add new domains.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I agree. I think a blood domain would actually be super cool. Um, Almost like the sacrifice health, and then maybe have some healing built into it as well. So it's
Ooh, that would be good.
like a
Yeah.
trade off. So you gamble. Hey, maybe I hit and heal my health back, or maybe I don't. Um, I think that almost using your health as a resource to either do more damage or something like that. I think that could be something that'd be super cool. Um,
Ooh, thoughts. A high stress build where it constantly attacks at your stress, where you
mm,
get max stress really fast. And if you're not watching that stress, then it starts eating into your
yeah,
health pool.
definitely could. Yeah,
That
see
could that
something
could
like
be
that.
another thought. So
I think correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think this is a class, but Sage and Splendor, they're not together, are they? Is that the
I
Druid?
don't think so. But what would that create?
I think a Sage and Splendor would create a just the support, like like a shaman almost. I think of kind of
Interesting.
like a
Yeah.
shaman class. I'd like to see those because I think that uh that would be just like your like that's like your healer and that's your support.
Yeah.
I think that those two could be super cool. Um, and I'd almost like to see Valor and Grace together too. Um, Almost that might be a little bit more difficult, but I'm trying to think of like a almost like a battlefield commander
hmm
um, sort of
So
play style.
this is something I actually still want to see. I want to see when they pick new subclasses. Like later on, so say you have the warrior, and then the warrior subclass, you wanna you get a subclass called like to mimic the the runic, um, what's it called? Like the rune. Oh man, what's it called in D&D? The
The
rune.
Rune Knight.
Rune Knight, yeah. So to mimic the Rune Knight, the subclass says it's a warrior subclass, but you gain the Codex domain and you drop another domain. So the
Mm,
subclass adds a new domain feature, but you're at the cost of either dropping Blade or Bone. I think that would be a really cool way to kind of flavor maybe like a blade singer. Like you're a
yeah.
wizard, but then and you gain the blade domain, but then you
Hmm.
choose whether to lose the codex or to lose the splendor domain. I think that would be kind of like an interesting way to do that kind of mix.
Yeah.
And you don't really have to change too many of the mechanics either.
Yeah. That almost like be a cool feature to add for homebrewing. Like, hey, if you want to build your own class, just slap two domains together, and here's your class, and see what happens.
Yeah,
I know the features would be hard. That would be kind of the harder task, but I think it'd be super interesting to just be like, hey, yeah, pick two domains, put them together, see what happens.
yeah,
And then from there, you can create the subclass or uh, what am I trying to say? The class together, and
yeah.
come up with a name, stuff like that. I think that'd be something that'd be super cool to try.
And I think it goes to say too, like we want more ancestries, we want more backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like give us more. Like that's what we want.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some rumors of saying that there's gonna be 4 subclasses. I don't know if those rumors are true because there's nothing
Mm-hmm.
confirming. It's just people talking.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think, and then the last thing I'll say real quick before we kind of close out
Mm-hmm.
with one last question, is I do want to see just more DM support. Daggerheart's great, but I'd
Yeah.
like to just see more things in the system that kind of help DMs like run the game. They
Yeah.
came out with campaign frameworks, which I think is great, but not a lot of those practical ones I feel like I have a good hold, but I just like something that I can. If someone asks me, "Hey, how do you do this?" It's like instead of saying, "Oh, this is how I run it," it's like, "Oh no, this is what the manuscript says you should
Yeah,
do."
I agree. I think that's one thing that's actually held me back a little bit from DMing or from GMing my first game, is that like I know how you do it because we played a lot, but it's also like I it's not like an official framework. I guess it's like here's a bunch of tips and tricks that you use, and I'm trying to put those together to hopefully DM well. So I think something like that, like an official DM content or support, I think that would be really nice to see.
Yeah, which I'll just kind of showcase what we're probably going to be releasing in our
Hmm.
next video. I think we're going to be doing a GM tips video where it's kind of a la question and format.
Yeah.
AJ's asking questions, and I'll give a bunch of tips on how to do
Hmm.
this. So I think that's what we're doing next.
For sure.
But yeah, so last question here. We'll kind of keep it short. If there's one piece of advice that you give to players who are wanting to play Daggerheart, what would you say?
Oh, one. Man, first, have fun. Obviously, be creative. I think that's the biggest difference for me as a player, coming from Dungeons and Dragons to Daggerheart, is that I can be creative with my abilities and my character. Um, so I just be creative. Do the weird thing. Do the thing that may not make sense, but if you can make it make sense, then it makes sense. Um, don't be so stuck on, oh, I have to do it this way because this is what the card says. Bend the rules. I had Beatles uh,
Pick a
uh,
lock.
pick a lock. There you go. I had Beatles pick a lock for me. There's nowhere in that card that said, hey, these Beatles can pick a lock. Um, but it just be creative. If you can imagine it, and if you can think it, it never hurts to try. The worst thing that can happen is the GM's going to say no, and you're in the same position anyways.
Yeah. And for
What
me,
about for GMs there?
so mine's a GM and a player tip, and I'll keep it really nice and simple. Players, trust your GM, and GM, trust your players.
Yeah.
I think if you guys go into a game of Daggerheart and you guys just trust that what's going to come out is going to be a good story, it's going to have those fun shits and giggles. You're going to have moments, like I've had more moments in Daggerheart where I've seen people cry tears of sadness and tears of joy just because of how the story is. And then I've also seen the same exact things where people are 1v1ing archfiends. And so, like, players, trust your GM, and more importantly, I think GM, just trust your players. I know it's scary to give players the reins and asking them questions about what they see. But if you're with a good group, if you're with a group that really kind of like knows, like we're here to have a good story, and have a good game. As long as there's trust between you two, I think, or between the group, I think will make Daggerheart really, really cool to play. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for sticking with us. I know this is kind of a long one today, but we appreciate you. We appreciate you guys supporting us, and yeah, thanks for watching.
yeah. And if you are interested in playing games of Daggerheart, we're always hosting games on our Discord. We also have a really good community over there. But with that being said, my name's Daniel.
I'm AJ.
See you guys.
See you.
From ink and steel, stories are forged. We are Blade-bound Saga.